My name is Haley Walker, and I turned 32 last month. 15 years ago, I came home from school to find my family gone and a note saying, "You'll figure it out." They took everything, including my college savings. Now I run a tech company worth millions. And guess who suddenly wants to be part of my life again? My family showed up demanding financial support after 15 years of silence. So I did what any abandoned child turned successful entrepreneur would do. I took them to court. If you're watching this, I would love to know where you're tuning in from. Hit like and subscribe and let me know in the comments section if anyone has ever abandoned you when you needed them most. I grew up in Portland, Oregon in what looked like a normal middle-class family from the outside. My parents, Frank and Brenda Walker, worked regular jobs, Dad as a sales manager at an electronics store, and Mom as an administrative assistant at a local dental office. My brother Travis was 2 years younger than me, and he was clearly the favorite child from day one. He could do no wrong in their eyes, while I was constant held to impossible standards. Behind our suburban facade, our family finances were a disaster. My father had a gambling problem he thought nobody knew about. Every month he'd disappear for a guy's weekend and return, either suspiciously flush with cash or more often sullen and aggressive, picking fights with my mother over the smallest things. Mom wasn't much better with money. Her shopping addiction meant our credit cards were perpetually maxed out, and mysterious packages would arrive that she'd hide in her closet, tags still attached there. Constant fighting about money filled our house with tension. "You're the one who blew the mortgage payment at the casino again." My mother would scream. "Well, if you didn't have to have another designer purse, maybe we could pay the electric bill." He'd counter. Neither of them ever took responsibility for their actions, always blaming each other or external circumstances for our financial problems. I found refuge in academics. School became my escape and my passion, while chaos reigned at home. But I could control my grades and achievements. By middle school, I was taking advanced classes and winning academic competitions. My teachers saw potential in me that my parents never acknowledged. The one person who did recognize my abilities was my maternal grandmother, Eleanor. She lived about 30 minutes away, and visiting her became my sanctuary. Grandma Eleanor had worked as a secretary at IBM in the early days of computing and maintained a fascination with technology. She bought me my first computer when I was 12. Nothing fancy, just a refurbished desktop, but it opened up a whole new world for me. "You've got a logical mind, Haley," she'd tell me while I showed her how to organize her digital photos or set up email filters. "Computers make sense in a way people often don't. They follow rules and patterns. I think you could really do something with this interest." With her encouragement, I signed up for programming classes in high school. By sophomore year, I was building basic websites for local businesses to earn extra money. I saved almost every penny, knowing instinctively that financial independence would be crucial to my future. Unfortunately, my parents discovered my savings account when I was 15. "We need to borrow some money for bills this month," my mother announced. Not really asking, just temporary, of course. Over the next year, they borrowed nearly $2,000 from me. Not a cent was ever repaid when I was 16. Grandma Eleanor passed away unexpectedly from a stroke. I was devastated. She had been my emotional anchor and biggest supporter in her will. She left me $5,000 with a note saying, "For your education and dreams, my brilliant girl." I kept this inheritance secret from my parents, opening a new account at a different bank and having the statement sent to my friend's house as my academic achievements grew. So did my parents' resentment. I was accepted into prestigious summer programs, named to the National Honor Society, and became captain of the debate team, rather than pride. These accomplishments seemed to trigger irritation in my parents. "Not everyone needs to hear about your perfect GPA." "Haley," my mother would say when I tried to share good news. "You think you're so much better than everyone else?" my father would mutter. They'd lavish praise on Travis for scraping by with C's, while my straight A's were met with indifference or criticism about how I was showing off. Travis learned from their example, teacher's pet. He'd sneer when I studied instead of watching TV. "No wonder you don't have any friends." It wasn't true. I had a small but solid group of friends from my advanced classes and debate team. But the narrative at home was that I was somehow defective for prioritizing academics by senior year. I had my sights set on college. I applied for every scholarship I could find and was preparing for a future that would take me far from the toxic atmosphere of my family home. I maintained a quiet optimism, counting down the days until graduation when I could begin building my own life. What I didn't fully understand at the time was how desperate my parents' financial situation had become. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter, some stamped with final notices. Collection agencies called constantly. There were hushed conversations about foreclosure. Still, my parents continued their destructive habits. Dad's gambling, mom's shopping, and their shared talent for avoiding reality. I should have seen the warning signs, the increasing tension. My parents whispered arguments that stopped when I entered the room, the way they began asking more questions about my savings and scholarship prospects. But I was 17, focused on my future, and unable to imagine the betrayal that was coming. The day everything changed started as one of my proudest achievements. Our debate team had traveled to Seattle for the regional championships, and I had won first place in the Lincoln Douglas debate category. The trophy sat on my lap during the entire bus ride home, and I couldn't wait to show it to my family. Despite their usual indifference to my accomplishments, I still harbored that childish hope for their approval. When the bus dropped me off 3 blocks from home, I practically sprinted the rest of the way, my backpack bouncing and trophy in hand. The first strange sign was the emptiness of our driveway. Both my parents' cars were gone, which was unusual for a Sunday evening. I figured they might have gone grocery shopping or to one of Travis's baseball games. As I approached our house, I noticed the curtains were missing from the living room windows. I inserted my key in the lock with a growing sense of unease. The door swung open to reveal a house that had been partially emptied. The living room, sofa, and TV were gone. The family photos that had lined the hallway had disappeared, leaving just empty hooks on the wall. "Mom? Dad? Travis?" I called out, my voice echoing in the half-empty space. No answer. I moved through the house in disbelief. My parents' bedroom was stripped bare, no furniture, no clothes in the closet. Travis's room was similarly empty, except for some discarded school papers and broken toys he hadn't wanted to take. The kitchen had been cleaned out of all food except some condiments in the refrigerator and a box of stale cereal in the pantry. And there on the kitchen counter was a single sheet of paper with my father's handwriting. "Haley, we've had to make some difficult decisions due to our financial situation. We're relocating to start fresh. You've always been independent and smart. You'll figure it out. You can stay in the house until the end of the month when the bank takes it. Don't try to contact us, Dad." I read the note 7 times, trying to comprehend what it was telling me. My family had packed up and left while I was at the debate competition. They had abandoned me without warning, without discussion, without even a goodbye. They had left me, a 17-year-old high school student, alone to figure it out. The trophy slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. I sank down beside it, my brains struggling to process this new reality. This couldn't be happening. People don't abandon their children like this. There must be some explanation, some misunderstanding. I frantically called my father's cell phone straight to voicemail, my mother's phone. Same result. I tried Travis, and to my shock, his phone actually rang, but he didn't pick up. I called my aunt in Spokane, who answered with obvious discomfort in her voice. "I'm sorry, Haley. They swore me to secrecy. They said you'd be fine on your own, since you're so smart and capable." I told them they were making a terrible mistake. She offered no real help, just hollow sympathy before making an excuse to end the call. I went next door to the Johnsons, our neighbors for the past decade. Mrs. Johnson looked at me with pity as she explained that my parents had been packing up a rental truck for 2 days. "They told us they were moving to Arizona for your father's new job opportunity. They said you were staying behind to finish school and would be living with a friend's family. We had no idea." Her voice trailed off as she saw the shock on my face. Back in the empty house, I checked the utilities and discovered they were all scheduled to be shut off within days. A call to the bank confirmed my worst fears. The house was in foreclosure and would be repossessed at the end of the month. My parents hadn't made a mortgage payment in 4 months. I went to check my bank account, hoping to at least have my savings to rely on. The account had been drained completely. The $200 I had saved for college expenses was gone. They had taken even that from me. The only money I had left was my grandmother's inheritance, which they didn't know about, safely hidden in an account at a different bank. That night, I called Travis one more time. To my surprise, he answered, "Why did you guys leave me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Look, it wasn't my decision," he said defensively. "Mom and Dad said we had to make a fresh start, and you didn't fit into the plan. They said you're smart enough to handle yourself and would probably be better off without us anyway. Don't make this a big deal, Haley. You've always been the independent one." The casual cruelty of his words struck me like a physical blow. I ended the call without another word. That night, alone in our abandoned house, the physical symptoms of trauma set in. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest felt tight and my heart raced so fast I thought I was having a heart attack. I curled up on my bed, the only piece of furniture left in my room, and sobbed until no more tears would come. Sleep was impossible as panic attacks hit in waves throughout the night. The next morning, I went to school in the same clothes I'd worn to the debate competition. The victory, now a distant memory. I went straight to my school counselor, Mrs. Rivera, and showed her the note. Her face transformed from confusion to horror as she read it. "Haley, this is child abandonment. It's illegal. We need to call Child Protective Services immediately." She made the call while I sat in her office, numb and disconnected from reality. A social worker named Janet came to the school that afternoon. She took my statement, photograph, the note, and accompanied me back to the house to document the situation. The system began grinding into motion. Reports filed, options discussed, temporary solutions proposed. But bureaucracy moves slowly, and in the meantime, I still had nowhere to go. That night was the worst. I returned to the empty house. Now, fully understanding that this was my new reality, my family had discarded me like unwanted furniture. The carefully constructed fiction I had maintained that despite their flaws, my family loved me at some basic level had been shattered completely. I sat in the kitchen with the note in front of me, reading those 9 cruel words over and over. "You've always been independent and smart. You'll figure it out." The immediate challenges were overwhelming. I needed food, utilities, and a place to live. Once the bank took the house, I needed to finish high school. I needed to process the emotional devastation of being abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Each task seemed insurmountable on its own, let alone all together. My debate coach, Mrs. Bennett, became my first lifeline when she heard what had happened. She immediately offered her guest room as temporary housing. Just until we figure out something more permanent, she said no one should have to face this alone, especially not someone with your potential. I moved in with the Bennetts within days, bringing the few possessions my family had left behind my clothes, books, and the old computer my grandmother had given me. Mrs. Bennett and her husband treated me with a kindness that felt almost foreign after years in my family's household. They didn't make me feel like a burden or an inconvenience. They included me in family dinners and gave me space when I needed to be alone. The legal aspects of my situation required immediate attention. Mrs. Rivera connected me with Richard Garfield, an attorney who took on my case pro bono. He explained the process of legal emancipation, which would allow me to function as an adult despite being underage. Given the circumstances with documented abandonment, the court should grant us without much resistance, he explained. This will allow you to sign contract access, any financial assistance you qualify for, and make your own legal decisions. The emancipation process took 6 weeks. During the hearing, I presented the abandonment note bank statements showing my cleaned-out account and testimony from neighbors and school officials. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Harris, looked at me with compassion as she granted the emancipation. "The court finds that your parents have abdicated their responsibility in a reprehensible manner," she stated. "You are clearly mature beyond your years and capable of managing your own affairs. I wish you didn't have to. Financial survival became my next focus. I found a weekend job at a local coffee shop and worked evenings at the public library on Sundays. I did data entry for a small accounting firm between these 3 part-time jobs. I cobbled together enough income to cover basic necessities while continuing school. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Between work, school, and homework, I averaged 4 hours a night. Dark circles became permanent features under my eyes. I lost weight as meals became irregular and often consisted of whatever was cheapest or free from my coffee shop job. But I refused to drop out of school or let my grades suffer. Education remained my ticket to a better future. The emotional toll was harder to quantify but impossible to ignore. I developed severe trust issues, questioning the motives of anyone who showed me kindness. Nightmares plagued what little sleep I got. I would dream of coming home to find everyone gone over and over in different variations. Sometimes I would dream my family had returned only to wake up to the reality of their absence. My abandonment issues affected every relationship. I kept people at arm's length, afraid to depend on anyone. When the Bennetts extended their original 2-week offer to stay as long as you need, I insisted on paying rent from my meager earnings. Unable to accept their generosity without feeling indebted. Despite these challenges, I graduated as valedictorian of my class. My speech carefully avoided any mention of family, focusing instead on resilience and self-reliance. The audience gave me a standing ovation. Unaware of the painful irony behind my words about overcoming obstacles, Mrs. Bennett cried. No blood relatives attended. With graduation came my next challenge: college. I had been accepted to State University with a partial scholarship for computer science, but it wouldn't cover all expenses. I combined this with my grandmother's inheritance, small grants I qualified for as an independent student, and student loans to make it work financially. Moving into the dormitory that fall was a strange experience. Around me, parents helped their children unpack, gave tearful goodbyes, and promised care packages and weekend visits. I arrived alone with 2 suitcases containing everything I owned in the world. My roommate, Zoe Miller, arrived with her entire family, parents, siblings, even a grandmother bearing homemade cookies. I braced myself for awkward questions about my own family, but when they invited me to join them for dinner, I found myself accepting. Their warmth was overwhelming, but not in an uncomfortable way. Later, when Zoe asked about my family situation, I gave her the abbreviated version. To my surprise, she didn't respond with pity or discomfort. "That's seriously messed up," she said. "Their loss. You're stuck with me now." It was the beginning of a friendship that would become one of the most important in my life. College life presented new challenges. The cramped student housing was a step up from homelessness, but still difficult. I maintained a ruthless budget, counting every penny. Ramen noodles became a dietary staple. I took maximum course loads to finish my degree faster and worked part-time in the computer lab to supplement my finances. My mental health deteriorated during my freshman year. The stress of financial insecurity, combined with the emotional trauma of abandonment, led to crippling anxiety and insomnia. Some nights I would lie awake until 4 a.m., then dragged myself to 8 a.m. classes running on caffeine and determination. The university's free counseling services became essential to my survival. My therapist, Dr. Patel, helped me understand that my abandonment was not my fault. Nothing a child does could ever justify what your parents did. She insisted in our sessions. Their actions reflect their character, not your worth. During winter break of freshman year, when the dorms closed, I had nowhere to go. Zoe insisted I come home with her to Chicago. "My mom already has the guest room ready," she said, brooking no argument that Christmas with the Millers showed me what a functional, loving family looked like. It was both healing and painful to witness. At some point during that first year, I wrote a letter to my parents. I found their address through a public records search. They had indeed moved to Phoenix, as the neighbors had mentioned. The letter wasn't angry or accusatory. It simply updated them on my life and asked why they had left. I never received a reply. The holidays were particularly difficult times. While other students went home to celebrate, I picked up extra shifts at work or stayed in friends' apartments. I created new traditions for myself: a movie marathon on Thanksgiving, a small gift to myself on Christmas morning, Chinese takeout on New Year's Eve. These rituals helped fill the void left by family traditions. In my sophomore year, I met Professor Janet Hughes in my advanced programming class. She noticed my aptitude and dedication, staying after class to discuss concepts beyond the curriculum. She became another mentor figure, someone who saw my potential and nurtured it without condition. "You have a unique perspective," she told me after reviewing my midterm project. "Your algorithm approaches problems differently than I've seen before." Have you considered application development under her guidance? I developed my first UP as a class project, a simple program that helped organize study schedules and prioritize assignments. To my surprise, other students actually wanted to use it. This small success planted a seed that would eventually grow into something much bigger. I graduated with honors in computer science, and the job offer started coming in. Several large tech companies extended attractive packages with competitive salaries and benefits. The security was tempting after years of financial instability, but something held me back from accepting. During my senior year, I had developed an advanced encryption protocol as part of my thesis project. Professor Hughes had been particularly impressed. "This has real-world applications, Haley. This isn't just academic theory. This could be marketable." I chose the road less traveled instead of corporate security. I opted for a position at a small startup where I could continue developing my encryption ideas. The salary was lower, the hours longer, and the risks higher, but the potential for growth and creative control appealed to me. 6 months into this job, I attended a tech conference in San Francisco where I met Derek Johnson, a brilliant programmer with complementary skills to mine. We stayed up all night in the hotel lobby, drawing diagrams on napkins and debating implementation strategies for what would eventually become our security software. "We should start our own company," Derek said as the sun came up. "Your encryption protocols combined with my user interface design, we could create something revolutionary." It seemed like an impossible dream, but the seed had been planted. We spent the next 4 months developing a business plan while still working our respective jobs. We needed startup capital, which neither of us had. Our break came when Derek introduced me to Marcus Chen, an angel investor who had funded his previous employer. We pitched our concept over coffee at a small cafe. I was nervous, sleep-deprived, and convinced we would be laughed out of the meeting. Instead, Marcus listened intently. I asked pointed questions about the technology and then shocked us both. "I like what I'm hearing. I'll put in $50,000 for a 15% stake." It wasn't a fortune in the tech world, but it was enough to get started. I quit my job the following week. Derek did the same. We rented a tiny office. Really? Just a converted storage room in a warehouse building, and threw ourselves into development. Those early days were exhilarating and terrifying. We worked 16-hour days, subsisting on coffee and takeout, sleeping on office couches when deadlines loomed. My tiny studio apartment became even more Spartan as I redirected every spare penny into the business. I sold my car, cut out any unnecessary expense, and lived as frugally as possible. The financial discipline I had learned through necessity now served me well as a business strategy. Our first major breakthrough came 8 months in. We developed an encryption algorithm that was significantly more secure and efficient than existing options on the market. When we demonstrated it at a cybersecurity conference, industry experts took notice. But success wasn't a straight line upward. Our initial software release had critical bugs that required expensive emergency fixes. A larger competitor threatened a frivolous patent lawsuit that drained our legal budget. 3 months of development work had to be scrapped when we discovered a fundamental flaw in our approach. Our bank account dwindled dangerously. We have about 6 weeks of runway left. Derek informed me one grim Friday afternoon, showing me the financial projections. We either need investment or revenue fast. That weekend, I didn't sleep. I refined our pitch deck, called every industry contact I had made, and prepared for a last-ditch effort to save the company. On Monday morning, I had 6 meetings scheduled with potential investors for the coming week. The first 5 meetings resulted in polite rejections. Too risky, too early stage, not enough traction. By the time I walked into the 6th meeting with venture capitalist Sofia Rodriguez, I was operating on fumes and fading hope. Sofia was different from the others. She asked technical questions that showed she understood our product at a deeper level. She pushed back on our market projections, making us defend our assumptions with data. The meeting, scheduled for 1 hour, stretched to 3. "I believe in what you're building," she said. "Finally, and more importantly, I believe in you. Haley, your persistence is impressive. My fund will invest $2 million for a 20% stake." Just like that, everything changed. We moved to proper offices, hired a team of developers, and accelerated our product development. The company grew from just Derek and me to a team of 50 within 18 months. We launched our security software suite to strong reviews and began acquiring enterprise clients. With my first significant paycheck, I bought a modest house. Nothing extravagant, but mine completely. After years of housing insecurity, having a permanent home represented more than just a financial investment. It was emotional security made tangible. 3 years after founding the company, we landed our first $1 million contract with a major financial institution. Their security team had tested our encryption against every known method of attack and found it superior to all alternatives. This validation from a risk-averse industry player opened more doors. Professional recognition followed. I was featured in Forbes 30 Under 30 in the technology category. The article briefly mentioned my background as a self-made entrepreneur who put herself through college. Though I had shared minimal details about my family situation with the interviewer, as the company continued to grow, so did my responsibilities and stress level. I worked constantly, partly from necessity and partly to avoid dealing with the emotional issues I still carried. My therapist, whom I continued to see monthly, pointed this out during one session. "You felt impressive walls, Haley. They've protected you, but they're also keeping out potential happiness. When was the last time you did something purely for joy?" It was a question I couldn't answer. My identity had become so intertwined with survival and then success that I had forgotten how to simply be. This realization led to small but significant changes. I started taking Saturdays off. I joined a hiking group. I allowed myself small luxuries without guilt. During this period of personal growth, I briefly dated our company's CFO, Michael Thornton. He was intelligent, ambitious, and seemed to understand my dedication to the business. But the relationship faltered as my trust issues surfaced. His frustration grew as I kept him at emotional arm's length. "It's like there's a part of you that's locked away," he said during our breakup conversation. "I can't compete with ghosts, Haley." He was right, of course. I was still haunted by abandonment, still waiting for everyone to eventually leave. My therapist helped me see this pattern and begin the difficult work of addressing it. "The people who left you were broken themselves," she explained. "Their actions weren't about you. They were about their own failings. Not everyone will leave, Haley. Some people stay." This truth was reinforced by the chosen family I had built around me. Zoe remained my closest friend, now living just a few miles away and working as a graphic designer. Mrs. Bennett, my former debate coach, still called monthly to check on me. Professor Hughes had become a valued advisor to my company. Derek was not just a business partner, but a trusted friend. These relationships had endured and deepened over time. 5 years after starting the company, we reached a major milestone. Our valuation hit $100 million after a new round of funding. We had grown to over 200 employees across 3 offices. Our security products protected data for companies in finance, healthcare, and government sectors. I had achieved more success than I could have imagined that day. I came home to find my family gone. The scared, abandoned 17-year-old would hardly recognize the confident CEO I had become. I had figured it out, just as their cruel note had suggested, but not in the way they had intended. I had built something meaningful from the wreckage they left behind. What I didn't realize was that my public success would eventually bring the past crashing back into my present. The Forbes feature had made me visible in a way I hadn't anticipated. My name and face were now associated with a valuable company, and that information had reached people who had once deemed me disposable. The first contact came through Facebook, of all places. I rarely used social media, maintaining minimal accounts, primarily for business networking purposes. The message notification showed a name I hadn't seen in 15 years. Travis Walker, hey sis. Long time no talk. Saw your Forbes article. Really proud of what you've accomplished. Would love to reconnect if you're open to it. I stared at the message for a full hour. Unable to form a response, my hands shook, my chest tightened in that familiar way that signaled the start of an anxiety attack. I closed the laptop without replying and called my therapist for an emergency session. This is understandably triggering, Dr. Wilson said. You don't owe him a response at all. But if you do choose to respond, remember that you control the terms of any potential reconnection. Your boundaries matter. After 3 days of consideration, I crafted a careful reply. Thank you for reaching out, Travis. It's been a long time. I would need to understand why you're contacting me now, after 15 years of silence before considering any kind of reconnection. His response came within minutes, as if he'd been waiting by his computer. I've regretted how things happened for years. Mom and Dad made terrible decisions, and I was too young and stupid to stand up to them. I should have reached out sooner. I'd like a chance to apologize in person if you'd be willing. We exchanged a few more messages, each carefully worded on my part. I learned that he was married with 2 children, working as an insurance adjuster in Phoenix. He claimed to have limited contact with our parents these days. He didn't explicitly mention my financial success again, but the timing of his outreach was suspicious. After 2 weeks of communication, I agreed to a phone call. Hearing his voice after so many years was surreal. He sounded like our father now, the same cadence and tone. He apologized repeatedly, claiming he had been just a kid who didn't understand the gravity of what was happening. Mom and Dad are not doing great. He eventually mentioned his tone carefully. Casual. Dad's had some health problems. They've struggled financially since the recession. They don't know I'm talking to you, by the way. There, it was the first hint of what this was really about. I let the statement hang in the air without response, and the conversation moved on to his children and job. But the seed had been planted. I agreed to meet Travis in person at a restaurant halfway between our cities. I chose a public place intentionally and told Zoe exactly where I would be, with instructions to call me at a specific time as a safety measure. I wasn't sure what I feared exactly, but caution had become second nature. Travis arrived with photos of his children, a 5-year-old girl and 3-year-old boy, your niece and nephew, he said, sliding the pictures across the table. They'd love to meet their Aunt Haley someday. The emotional manipulation was transparent, but still effective. These innocent children had done nothing wrong. They didn't deserve to be casualties of the rift between their father and me. I found myself softening, despite my resolve to remain detached. Travis spoke of regrets and lost years. He shared updates about extended family members I had once known. He mentioned our parents carefully painting them as older and somewhat changed by life's hardships. Dad had a minor heart attack last year, he said, stirring his coffee. The medical bills have been rough. They had to sell their house and move into an apartment. Mom still asks about you. Sometimes, wonders how you're doing. She could have called any time in the last 15 years to find out. I replied, my voice steady. Both of them could have. Travis nodded, looking appropriately contrite. They're too ashamed, I think, but they do regret what happened. People make terrible mistakes sometimes, especially when they're desperate. At the end of our meal, Travis introduced another character into the drama, his wife, Amber. She's been encouraging me to reach out to you for years. She thinks family reconciliation is important. Would you be open to meeting her sometime? Maybe with the kids. I agreed to think about it. Non-committal, but not entirely closed off. Part of me wanted to walk away and never look back. Another part, the wounded child still within me, craved some form of resolution or explanation that might help me make sense of what had happened. A week later, I received an email from my mother. Seeing her name in my inbox sent a jolt through my system. The message was emotional and carefully crafted. My dearest Haley, not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of you and regretted the terrible mistake we made. We were in such a desperate situation back then, making poor decisions out of fear. I know words can never make up for what we did, but I would give anything for a chance to apologize in person. Your father and I have changed. We've learned hard lessons. We're so proud of the amazing woman you've become despite our failures. Please consider allowing us back into your life. With all my love, Mom." The calculated timing was obvious. First Travis, then the introduction of innocent children to soften me, and now this emotional appeal. I discussed it with my therapist, who helped me see the patterns at play. Notice how she refers to the terrible mistake we made rather than the terrible thing we did to you? Dr. Wilson pointed out there's a subtle deflection of responsibility there, and the pride in who you've become, despite our failures, suggests they see your success as separate from, rather than influenced by, their abandonment. Despite these red flags, I eventually agreed to a family dinner. My curiosity and some lingering need for closure overrode my better judgment. I selected an upscale restaurant in my city, creating a neutral territory where I would feel more in control. They arrived as a unit, Travis and Amber with their children, followed by my parents seeing Frank and Brenda Walker in person. After 15 years was jarring. They had aged considerably. My father's hair had gone completely gray and his face carried deep lines. My mother had gained weight and moved with a slowness that hadn't been there before. They looked like ordinary aging parents, not the monsters my memory had preserved. My mother embraced me, tears streaming down her face. I remained stiff in her arms. My father attempted the same, but I stepped back and offered a handshake instead. The children, oblivious to the tension, were excited to meet their rich aunt, a description that made me wince internally throughout dinner. My parents presented a revised version of our family history. According to their narrative, they had been victims of circumstance, forced into impossible choices by financial disaster. They characterized leaving me behind as giving me independence rather than abandonment. "We knew you were the strong one, the smart one. My father explained Travis needed us in a way you never did. You were always so self-sufficient. We thought you'd be better off without our problems dragging you down." My mother added we were drowning in debt, being chased by some very dangerous people. Your father owed money too. We had to disappear. I listened without interrupting, noting the convenient omission of how they had emptied my bank account before leaving, or how a simple conversation might have given me some agency in the situation rather than a cold note, or how they had made no attempt to contact me for 15 years until I became successful. The conversation shifted when my father clutched his chest dramatically during dessert, popping a nitroglycerin pill. "Just a little chest pain," he explained, waving off concern. "Remnant of the heart attack. These medications are so expensive without good insurance." And there it was, the first direct reference to their financial struggles and medical expenses. It was skillfully done, I had to admit. Create sympathy, demonstrate vulnerability, imply need without directly asking for help. By the end of the evening, the actual request finally emerged. "Haley, I hate to even bring this up," my father said hesitantly, "but we're in a really difficult position with my medical bills. The hospital is threatening collections. We need about $50,000 to get them off our backs. It would be a loan. Of course. We'd pay you back as soon as we can. I promise to think about it, neither committing nor refusing outright." As we parted, my mother pressed a folder into my hands. "Our contact information and some documents about your father's condition, just so you understand the situation at home." I reviewed the folder: medical bills, past due notices, and a loan application that had been denied. I also ran background checks on my family, something I should have done before meeting them. What I discovered was illuminating. Travis had filed for bankruptcy twice in the past decade. My parents had a string of addresses suggesting frequent moves, probably evictions. There were small claims court judgments against them from various creditors. Their pattern of financial irresponsibility had continued unabated in my absence. The only thing that had changed was that they now saw me as a potential solution to their problems. Over the following weeks, the contact increased. My mother called regularly with updates on my father's health. Travis invited me to his daughter's birthday party. They created a steady stream of family obligations and emotional hooks. The requests for financial help became more frequent and varied. Travis needed help with his mortgage. My mother's car had broken down. My father required a specialized treatment, not covered by their insurance. Each story came with documentation and tearful gratitude for even being willing to consider helping them. I consulted financial advisors and attorneys about establishing clear boundaries on their advice. I offered to pay directly for one of my father's medical treatments, not by giving them money, but by paying the provider directly. They reluctantly agreed, but seemed disappointed by this arrangement. The situation reached a breaking point when they moved to my city without warning. "We wanted to be closer to you," my mother explained when they called to announce they had rented an apartment just 20 minutes from my home. "Now we can really rebuild our relationship." Their proximity increased, the pressure exponentially. Dropped by visits, last-minute invitations to family dinners, calls for emergency assistance with bills and expenses. Each interaction left me emotionally drained and anxious. The final straw came when they showed up unannounced at my company's offices. I was in a board meeting when my assistant interrupted to inform me that my parents were in the lobby, insisting on seeing me about an urgent family matter. The urgent matter turned out to be that their rent was 3 days late, and they needed $4,000 to avoid eviction. As I wrote the check against my better judgment, my father glanced around my office appreciatively. "You've done really well for yourself, Haley. We always knew you would. That's why we felt okay about leaving you on your own. Some birds need to be pushed from the nest to soar." That rewriting of history, transforming their abandonment into some kind of tough love gift, was the moment clarity returned. They had not changed. They were the same people who had left a 17-year-old girl with a callous note and empty bank account. The only difference was that now they saw me as a resource to exploit, rather than a burden to discard. That evening, I called my attorney, Sarah Goldstein, and scheduled an appointment for the following day. Enough was enough. "You have options," Sarah Goldstein explained, her office filled with afternoon sunlight. "A restraining order would be the most immediate solution based on the pattern of behavior you've described. We could make a case for harassment." I'd been working with Sarah on business matters for years, but this was our first discussion of my personal situation. I had detailed the entire history from the original abandonment to the current financial pressure campaign. My concern is that they'll go public with some twisted version of our family story. I explained they know I have a reputation to protect now. The company is in negotiations for acquisition. Any negative publicity could impact the deal. Sarah considered this. "Then perhaps a more comprehensive approach is needed. We could file a civil suit for the original abandonment, the theft of your savings, and the current harassment. It would bring everything into the open on our terms, with the evidence properly presented." We discussed the pros and cons of various legal strategies. A cease and desist letter seemed like the appropriate first step. A formal warning that would establish boundaries and create a paper trail if further action became necessary. The letter was carefully worded, outlining the pattern of abandonment, followed by financial exploitation. It requested no further contact and warned that continued attempts would result in legal action. I had it delivered to their apartment by courier with copies sent to Travis and his wife. Their response was swift and predictable. My father called, leaving a voicemail filled with righteous indignation. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat family. We raised you better than this, Haley. If this is how you want to play it, maybe the world should know what kind of person you really are." The thinly veiled threat confirmed we had made the right decision. My mother's approach was different. Tearful messages about family healing and forgiveness, positioning me as the unreasonable party for involving attorneys in a family matter. When they ignored the cease and desist letter and continued their contact attempts, Sarah advised moving forward with the lawsuit. "We need to show them you're serious. They're counting on your desire to avoid conflict and publicity." We filed a civil suit alleging harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and attempted fraud. We also included the original abandonment and theft of my college savings. Though Sarah warned that the statute of limitations might apply to those older claims, my parents responded with a countersuit that took audacity to new heights. They claimed they had invested in my early education and development, which had directly contributed to my current success. Therefore, they argued, they were entitled to financial compensation as early investors in my career. The absurdity might have been laughable if it weren't so painful. They were essentially claiming that basic parental responsibilities, like sending me to public school and providing shelter for 17 years, constituted business investment deserving of returns. As the legal process moved forward, the discovery phase revealed even more about my family than I had known. Their financial history included not just gambling debts and shopping addiction, but also several instances of insurance fraud and small-scale scams targeting elderly neighbors. They had left a trail of exploited relationships and unpaid debts across multiple states. Travis was deposed as part of the proceedings under oath. He admitted something I had long suspected. Mom and Dad saw Haley's Forbes article and decided to reconnect specifically because of her financial success. Dad said it was like winning the lottery without buying a ticket. The case began attracting media attention. A local business journal ran a story titled "Tech CEO Sues Parents Who Abandoned Her," which was picked up by larger outlets. I authorized Sarah to make a brief statement emphasizing that this was a private family matter that unfortunately required legal resolution. After attempts at reasonable boundaries failed, the support I received from my company and friends was unwavering. Derek insisted on rearranging our schedules so I could attend all necessary legal proceedings. Zoe came to court with me on difficult days. My executive team stepped up to handle more responsibilities while I dealt with the lawsuit. Dr. Wilson, my therapist, provided expert testimony about the psychological impact of child abandonment. The trauma Emma's Walker experienced at 17 created lasting trust issues and anxiety that required years of therapy to address. The recent reappearance of her family and their financial demands has re-traumatized her, undoing significant therapeutic progress. The most surprising development came when Travis decided to testify on my behalf against our parents. His wife, Amber, had apparently given him an ultimatum after learning the full story of my abandonment. Either you stand up for what's right, or I'm taking the kids to my mother's. She had told him Travis's testimony was damning. They talked about leaving Haley behind for weeks before doing it. They specifically waited until she was at their debate competition so they wouldn't have to face her. Dad joked that she was the smart one so she'd figure it out. That's where that line in the note came from. It was never about protecting her from dangerous creditors or giving her independence. They just didn't want the responsibility anymore. He also confirmed that they had specifically targeted me for financial gain after learning of my success. They talked about how much they could reasonably ask for without seeming too greedy. They planned to start with smaller requests and work up to larger ones once they'd established regular contact. My mother's reaction to this testimony was theatrical. She collapsed in tears, wailing about family, betrayal, and ingratitude from both her children. The performance might have been more convincing if she hadn't been checking to see who was watching. Throughout her breakdown, my father took a different approach on the stand. Cold and calculating, he portrayed himself as a practical man who had made difficult decisions for family's survival. We couldn't all start fresh with the debts following us. Someone had to be left behind. And Haley was the most capable. It was a compliment, really. When asked about emptying my bank account before leaving, he shrugged. We paid for everything for 17 years. That money was rightfully ours as reimbursement for raising her. The opposing attorney's cross-examination of me was aggressive and personal. He portrayed me as ungrateful, selfish, and vindictive, questioning why a successful businesswoman would sue her elderly, ill parents instead of helping them. Miss Walker? Isn't this lawsuit really about revenge rather than any actual damages? He asked, his tone condescending. No, I replied calmly. It's about boundaries. I tried setting reasonable ones, which were repeatedly violated. This lawsuit became necessary when they refused to respect my clearly stated limits. But they're your parents, he pressed. Don't you have a moral obligation to care for them in their old age and illness? I believe moral obligations are a two-way street, I responded. They chose to terminate their parental relationship when I was 17. They can't selectively reclaim it now because it's financially advantageous. Judge Angela Martinez, who had been assigned to our case, asked pointed questions throughout the proceedings. When my father attempted to justify the abandonment as a necessary financial decision, she interrupted him. "Mr. Walker, are you suggesting that abandoning a minor child is an acceptable solution to financial problems?" she asked. "Your Honor, we were in extraordinary circumstances," he began. "That wasn't my question," she cut in. "Is child abandonment ever an appropriate response to financial difficulty?" "No, Your Honor," he finally admitted. As the trial progressed, financial evidence painted a clear picture. My parents had a documented history of exploiting others for money, leaving unpaid debts, and living beyond their means. Their claims of desperate circumstances forcing them to abandon me were undermined by records showing they had purchased a new car and taken a vacation to Las Vegas shortly after relocating to Arizona. In her closing argument, Sarah emphasized the pattern of exploitation. "This is not about a family disagreement or a daughter unwilling to care for aging parents. This is about calculated abandonment, followed by equally calculated attempts to exploit Ms. Walker's hard-earned success. The defendants abandoned their child, but not their sense of entitlement to her resources. The opposing counsel portrayed my parents as flawed but loving people who had made a terrible mistake and were seeking reconciliation. Ms. Walker's success is admirable, but does it give her the right to deny her parents forgiveness and basic human compassion? This lawsuit serves no purpose except punishment for past wrongs that cannot be undone." After 3 weeks of testimony and arguments, the case was in Judge Martinez's hands. The waiting period was excruciating. I threw myself into work during the day and suffered through anxiety-filled nights. The media attention had thankfully dwindled as newer scandals captured public interest. But the stress remained intense. When we returned to court for the verdict, I felt strangely calm. Whatever the outcome, I had stood up for myself and exposed the truth. That alone represented progress from the abandoned 17-year-old who had blamed herself for her family's desertion. Judge Martinez's ruling was unequivocal. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts," she announced, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "The defendant's behavior constitutes harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Furthermore, their countersuit is dismissed as frivolous and without merit." She granted the restraining order requiring my parents to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from me, my home, and my workplace. They were prohibited from contacting me directly or through third parties. Additionally, she ordered them to pay my legal fees and a modest sum in damages for emotional distress. While the statute of limitations prevents legal remedy for the original abandonment, Judge Martinez noted this court finds the defendant's actions morally reprehensible. Abandoning a minor child and stealing her savings demonstrates a profound failure of parental responsibility that cannot be excused by financial difficulties. As we left the courthouse, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The legal battle had been draining, but it provided a formal acknowledgement of wrongs that had gone unaddressed for 15 years. The court had validated my experience and my right to set boundaries. Travis approached me outside, his expression conflicted. "I'm sorry it came to this," he said. "I should have stood up to them years ago. I was a coward. We were both children, shaped by difficult parents," I replied. "But we get to choose who we become as adults. We agreed to maintain limited contact with clear boundaries. His children, my niece and nephew, deserved a chance to know their art, even if the relationship with their grandparents remained severed." In the months that followed, I focused on healing and moving forward. Dr. Wilson suggested creating something positive from the painful experience. Many young people face abandonment or family breakdown without the resources you eventually developed. Your story could help others in similar situations. This conversation sparked an idea. I established the Figure It Out Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting teens facing family abandonment, housing insecurity, or aging out of foster care. The foundation provided emergency housing, educational grants, mentorship, and therapeutic services. When someone tells a teenager to figure it out, we want to be the resource that actually helps them do that. I explained at the foundation's launch event. The name reclaimed the cruel dismissal from my parents' note and transformed it into a mission of empowerment. The foundation established a scholarship program specifically for students from unstable home environments. Each year, we selected 20 recipients who demonstrated academic potential despite challenging circumstances beyond financial support. We provided mentoring and internship opportunities at partner companies, including my own. My personal story, previously kept private, became part of my public identity as I advocated for abandoned and at-risk youth. I gave interviews to raise awareness about teen homelessness and the challenges of navigating education and early adulthood. Without family support. A TED Talk I delivered titled Figuring It Out. Resilience After Abandonment reached over 2 million views online. In it, I shared the practical and emotional strategies that had helped me survive and eventually thrive. Abandonment forces you to answer the question of who you are. When everything familiar is stripped away, I explained, it's a brutal way to learn self-reliance, but the strength you discover becomes unshakable. Writing became another form of healing. I began working on a memoir about my journey from abandonment to success. The process was painful but cathartic, allowing me to process experiences I had previously compartmentalized. The book, eventually published under the title The Note, became a bestseller and further expanded the foundation's reach. As my public advocacy work grew, so did my capacity for personal connection. I met Ryan Kelly, an architect who volunteered design services for the foundation's transitional housing projects. Unlike previous relationships, this one developed slowly and steadily, built on mutual respect and gradually increasing vulnerability. "I've read your book," he told me on our third date. "I understand trust doesn't come easily for you. I'm willing to earn it at whatever pace works for you." His patience and consistency helped me dismantle the emotional barriers I'd constructed for the first time. I found myself able to depend on someone without constant fear of abandonment. When panic or distrust surfaced, as they occasionally did, he responded with compassion rather than frustration. The foundation work brought me into contact with others who had experienced family estrangement. Their stories reinforced what my therapist had long maintained. That family is ultimately defined by love, support, and presence, not merely by blood relation. I had built a chosen family over the years. Zoe, who had been my friend since freshman year. Mrs. Bennett, who had offered shelter when I had none. Professor Hughes, who had recognized my potential. Derek, who had partnered with me to build our company. And now Ryan, who showed me that vulnerability could be strength rather than weakness. This network of genuine connection contrasted sharply with the hollow demands of biological family that had abandoned me when I had nothing and returned only when I had something they wanted. The difference clarified my understanding of what constitutes true family bonds. As the foundation grew, we expanded our programs to include legal advocacy for minors seeking emancipation. I thought often of Richard Garfield, the attorney who had helped me navigate that process years earlier, and how crucial his assistance had been during a desperate time. The restraining order against my parents was eventually made permanent when they violated its terms multiple times, sending messages through acquaintances and attempting to contact me at public events. They eventually moved back to Arizona, apparently having exhausted their opportunities for financial exploitation in my city. Travis maintained occasional contact, bringing his children for carefully planned visits a few times a year. Our relationship remained complicated, but improved gradually as he continued therapy and developed healthier boundaries with our parents. 5 years after the court case, my company completed a successful acquisition by a larger tech firm, multiplying my personal wealth significantly. I stepped down as CEO but remained on the board while shifting my primary focus to the foundation's work. The money brought freedom, but not happiness in itself. The true richness in my life came from meaningful work, genuine relationships, and the knowledge that my experiences, even the painful ones, were being transformed into support for others facing similar challenges. In reflecting on my journey, I recognized that abandonment had taught me harsh but valuable lessons, that I was stronger than I knew, that genuine connections were to be treasured rather than expected, and that purpose could emerge from pain when channeled constructively. The scared 17-year-old who had stared at a cruel note saying "you'll figure it out" could never have imagined where that forced journey of figuring it out would lead. Through necessary self-reliance, I had discovered capacities within myself that might have remained dormant in a more conventional life path. This doesn't excuse or justify what my parents did. Their abandonment was an act of profound selfishness and cruelty, but my response to it, the life I built despite, and perhaps because of their desertion, became a testament to resilience and the human capacity to create meaning from suffering. If you've stayed with me through this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to figure it out when someone who should have supported you disappeared instead? How did you rebuild trust after betrayal? Your experiences might help others who are still in the middle of their own difficult journeys. Please like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that abandonment doesn't define their worth or limit their potential. Thank you for listening, and remember that your story is still being written, no matter how painful some chapters have been.